Thank you, Madam President. This bill is entitled An Act Prohibiting Employers from Charging Employees for Training Costs Upon Separation from Employment. It's a very interesting bill, especially from my perspective, because I did not know that the current law was in effect, and I was actually somewhat surprised to discover that during our conversations and debate in the Labor Committee on the proposal that's before us. Effectively, what this bill does is it says that if you're an employer and you would like to offer some sort of training benefit to a potential or existing employee, maybe because you're having difficulty finding quality employees. I know some folks in the manufacturing industry, for example, sometimes have a tough time finding people qualified to work in that industry. They will suggest that they'll train someone. They'll send them away to school and teach them how to operate a CNC machine or what have you, so that they can come back and be productive and working for that company. And everyone benefits because obviously that employee is being given an opportunity. They're learning additional skills that make them more valuable as an employee, and the employer gets the benefit of having some qualified and quality labor, working for their company. It makes perfect sense. And I think it's something that has been ongoing in our state in many, many fields for a long, long time. In fact, every time I've mentioned this bill to someone new, they always come up with some additional example of where it's being used. The United States military. I was talking to our Senate leader last night, and he mentioned Sikorsky offers credits to employees to advance their college education. I think there's a lot of different examples that can be used. So I was really surprised to see this bill come up suggesting that a policy I didn't even exist is now going to be applied in all cases and not just in cases where the employer has 26 or more employees. So I might start with a question. Madam President, through you to the chairman of the Labor Committee, I'm just curious, what is the intent of the bill before us?
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Senator Kushner.
Madam President, I apologize. Would the good senator repeat the question?
Senator Sampson, let's try that again.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for joining us, Madam Chairman. The question, I guess, is what is the goal of the legislation that's before us? What is the intent behind it? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, the goal of this is to cover all employees. Right now, it's limited to employers who have 26 or more employees, so this would change prospectively the law so that in the future you could not be required in any employment situation in our state.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the answer. But within the response, as she said, this would change it from applying to businesses with 26 or more employees to everyone else. And it's the it that I'm looking for an answer on. What is it? What is the policy that is being expanded here to not just businesses of 26 or more employees, but to all businesses that have any employees? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, this law generally prohibits employers from requiring employees to execute an agreement that requires the employee to repay the employer if the employee does not stay on the job for a certain duration, including when the repayment is reimbursement for training. Current law prohibits this for all employers that have 26 employees, and the bill expands this to cover employers regardless of their size.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So, beyond the letter of the legislation that's before us and the legal description thereof, can I ask if there is some other impetus behind this proposal? This is what I'm not understanding. is where does this come from? What is happening in the world that is suggesting that the Labor Committee should have taken up this bill and it should be before the Senate right now? I don't. Admittedly, I still, despite being in the Labor Committee and debating this bill and several questions into it, I still have no idea what is going on in the world that says that this is a good idea and that we need to do this as a protection for employers or employees or anyone. And that's what I'm looking for, is an argument in favor of the bill. Is there one, through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I think what is clear is that we in the state of Connecticut have a history, and one I'm proud of protecting workers in our state and making sure that they are not taken advantage of in any way. And through the course of the history of our labor laws, we did at some time pass a bill that went into effect that prohibited employers from charging employees upon separation, or requiring it as a condition of employment that you agreed to pay your training costs when you left the employer. I think that's a good law, but it came to our attention because there's been some news about the fact that there are employers around the country where these laws don't exist that have started charging employees for training costs, even sometimes in fast food establishments. Now, clearly, that seems very obvious that it shouldn't be allowed. When we went in and looked at the history here in Connecticut, we found we have pretty good law here, but we did take note that it's not as expansive as it should be because some workers are carved out of that protection. So our bill here, and the reason we're here in the chamber discussing it, is to make sure that every worker has the same protection regardless of the size of the employer. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer, although I fail to see how this is a protection for anyone. This is the government establishing and inserting itself in between an employer and an employee in a voluntary agreement, because in Connecticut we have at-will employment, and presumably no one can force someone to sign something. I get that response on a lot of labor bills, that somehow the employer is mistreating the employee because they are going to require them to do something. That's not what's happening here. The fact of the matter is that this is a policy that would prohibit people from engaging in a voluntary business arrangement that is a benefit to both of them. And if it's not perceived as a benefit, I would imagine that either the employer or the employee would not participate. Madam President, through you to the chairman, is there any examples that can be provided of violations of this policy within the last year, say? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I have no examples to provide at this time. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Well, that's interesting because it was suggested that this is before us to prevent employers from taking advantage of employees, and yet we don't have any evidence that that is actually occurring. But I find myself a little twisted up in this debate because I happen to know that this type of behavior and activity is going on all over the place. This is happening in like every industry to some degree. Major manufacturing companies, people in almost all industries, education, municipalities, school teachers are being offered benefits as long as they stay on the job, with the understanding that those benefits would terminate and they may be responsible for the costs if they leave the job prematurely. And people go into these arrangements with their eyes open. So this is happening right now. And that's why I said I was so surprised when I came across this bill and discovered that there's a law against this. Because, newsflash, this is happening. This is happening all over. And thank heavens, because these are good policies. These are not bad policies that we should be trying to get rid of. So I'm going to try one more time, and then I'm going to talk about the bill myself. But if there is any chance that there is a compelling argument that's coming from the majority suggesting that this is a good policy, I would like to hear it. I want to understand why it's a good idea to interfere with a private contract between an employer and employee because an employer offering someone a job and an opportunity in exchange for a promise that they're going to live up to their end of the bargain is not a benefit, and it is perceived as the employer taking advantage, as was described. Any example of a case where an employer did take advantage of an employee, I would love to hear that. Any case where someone has been charged with this as a crime for violating the existing statute, I would love to hear about it. And I'm wondering why it's never been prosecuted after the several examples that I just provided of where this is going on. So I'm just, I want to be honest about every debate we have in this chamber. And I am trying to give the opposition every opportunity to convince me that what is being presented is good policy for the state of Connecticut that will be a benefit for the people that I represent. And I'm not seeing it. And so far, after our debate in the Labor Committee, and so far after half a dozen questions that I've asked, I still don't have anything compelling to tell me this is good policy. I know what's going on in the world. I understand what is being offered by employees and how employers and how employees are responding to that. And I see that as only favorable. So I'm going to ask just one final time. If there is any compelling information that might change my mind, what would that be? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, when I became aware that there are employers of low-wage workers that engage in minimal amount of training and then require them to pay back large sums of money upon separation, I became aware that this is an issue we would not want to see in the state of Connecticut. And so we looked into the law that we had, the existing law, and we thought it was pretty good, but that we could make it better by expanding it to cover employers of all sizes. And so I'm very much aware that we do a pretty good job here in the state of Connecticut in terms of our labor laws. And I think that we're always looking to make sure that we're improving on them and protecting all workers. And so from my perspective, this is extending existing statute to smaller employers. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that answer, except that I would need a little more clarification. You mentioned low-wage workers. I don't know exactly what that is. Maybe you could describe for me what you mean by low-wage workers, and also provide the example that you just mentioned. Which low-wage workers were taken advantage of in this state? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Madam President. I consider that there's a vast number of workers who identify as low-wage workers. Clearly, those at the minimum wage typically are referred to as low-wage workers, even though we've done a great job in the state of increasing the minimum wage over recent years. It's still not a living wage, and still people have a hard time making ends meet. So I would certainly consider that. Putting a top hourly ceiling on what I would consider a low-wage worker, I have not thought about it in those terms, but clearly, workers who are making a minimum wage. And I hope that we can continue to improve their circumstances so they can continue to achieve in our state. So, through you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer. So we've established that the low-wage workers that you're referring to are at least folks who make the minimum wage, maybe some amount more. But let's just consider that. So the other part of my question was who? So who in particular, what minimum wage workers in the state were taken advantage of by an employer and how? Through Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
I thank you, Madam President. Through you, I believe you've asked this question several ways. I will answer it again that I do not have an example to share with you of a particular workforce that has been taken advantage of it, or worker in particular. I think I've been pretty clear that we are looking at cases in other states, and when I heard about this, it seemed worthy of investigation, and upon investigation, we learned that we have a pretty good law here in the state of Connecticut, but it doesn't cover all workers, and therefore this bill would address that and would seek to expand it to every employer regardless of size. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you again for that answer. So we've established that no one has been charged with a crime based on the current statute that is already law that applies to 25 or 26 and more employees, and there are no examples from Connecticut. You mentioned you've become aware of other cases now in other states. Maybe you can give me one of those examples to show me how a minimum wage worker has been taken advantage of by their employer by requiring them to pay for training. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, there was a description of a trucker who took advantage of a program that was advertised as free training, and an attempt to leave the job was found that she was considered in debt to the company for tens of thousands of dollars, and this was part of an article that was describing different cases from around the country. I know that that is not necessarily a low-wage worker, but in my comments, I referred to one concern I had was low-wage workers, and I remember reading about workers in a fast food operation that were asked to repay for their training experience on the job. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for finally pointing to an example. I hope that there are specifics, because I'd really like to get into what exactly happened there. Do we know if this trucker signed an agreement as an employee, and what that agreement said, and on also what the disposition of that case was? Was there a court case? Was that person found responsible for the money? Was the employer at fault for misrepresenting the situation, or were they in the right? Can you tell me a little more than simply a trucker answered an ad and found out they were responsible later for something? It's not really conclusive based on that, and this is the first I'm hearing of it, because I know this was not submitted as part of the testimony on the bill. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, I don't have any additional information on the case.
Senator Sampson.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President. And I'm done with my questions. So I would just take a moment just to let that all sink in for me. As I said, my goal here is not simply to win the debate or win the argument. My job as a state senator representing my constituents is to try and come up with the best policy for the state of Connecticut, and to do right by the constituents that I represent. And for me, a decision like this is a super easy one, because this bill, in its simplest form, is an infringement on the rights of employers and employees. That's what it is. In its simplest form, if you boil it down, it says that employers and employees cannot engage in a private agreement. Now, the majority can characterize that as we're protecting the employees, and they can say that all they want. But when pressed for an example of somebody who was oppressed by their employer, there's never any meat there, because it didn't happen. And this policy, the way it's being characterized, is the exact opposite in the way this works in the real world. This policy, I'm confusing the policy of the bill before us and the policy behind it, and I want to be very clear. The policy that this aims to limit is a good policy, and that policy is known as freedom. It's the idea that an employer and an employee can strike a bargain that they both want to participate in because they both benefit. There's a word for that too. It's called capitalism. And capitalism is what built this country. Capitalism is what has allowed us to have the quality of life that we have in the United States of America. And capitalism and freedom come right after each other in my conversation, not by accident, but because they are the same thing. And when people bash capitalism and use examples like corporate welfare and so forth, they should understand no one ever bashes capitalism by using actual examples of capitalism. They always try and use some sort of other thing that is not capitalism as an attempt to knock it down. Government involvement being the number one implement used to damage what is free market capitalism. Freedom. The freedom to engage in a clever business arrangement that benefits both parties is a good thing. You have an employer that is looking for qualified employees to work for them, and they can't find them. Maybe because the qualified employees that used to work for the machine shop that they own have moved to other states because of the high cost of living created by the Connecticut state government. So they are forced to try and find other ways and other mechanisms to find those employees. So what do? They say, you know what? We'll have to train people. But how can we get people to come take the risk of training to come work for us and expend that money on their own? Because most people who are entering the job force might not have the money to do so. So they come up with an idea, and that says, why don't we go to the local community college and tell the shop teachers there that we're willing to take on employees for our manufacturing outfit, and we'll pay for their schooling, but we're going to expect something in return. Merely that they stay and work for us for a year or two instead of moving to South Carolina like the guy before him. That's not crazy. That's a good thing. Because you know what happens by having freedom and having the ability to come up with that clever solution to that problem? Everyone benefits. The employer benefits because they get their employee that has the qualities and the qualifications necessary. The employee benefits because they get an education and a job based on training that they could not have afforded any other way. This bill aims to prevent that. Why on earth would anyone want to prevent that activity from happening? I don't understand it. Madam President, through you, using the example I just did, is there a reason why we would like to pass a law to prevent that activity?
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Madam President, I believe this is a good bill and that we should pass it because it will actually expand good statutes that we already have in government in the state of Connecticut to all employees. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you for that compelling argument, Madam Chairman. If anyone's watching this, I hope they understand just how clear it is that the majority has no real compelling statement for why they want to interfere with the rights of employees and employers in this way. Because make no mistake, that's what's happening here. And each one of us was elected by our constituents primarily to defend their rights. That's like the number one job we have. We're supposed to make policy for the state of Connecticut, but the number one thing we're supposed to do is to protect the rights of our constituents. And one of those rights is that they get to make their own path in life. Pursuit of happiness, I think the Declaration of Independence says. They get to pursue their dreams. They get to pursue their own desires in life and choose their own path. This bill says you do not get to choose your path. If you want to make an agreement with the employer down the street that they're going to pay for your education and you're going to work there for 2 years, you cannot do that. Why? Because the majority thinks that you shouldn't be able to. And that is a direct violation of the rights of that individual. So when you hear the argument, we're on the side of employees, we're trying to protect employees from unscrupulous employers. I'm here trying to protect employees and employers from the government, and particularly from this majority that wants to take away the rights of those people to engage in commerce in a free manner in America. I have an amendment, Madam President. It is LCO number 7396. I asked the clerk if he can call that up, and I'd be allowed to summarize the amendment.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 7396, Senate Amendment A.
Senator Sampson, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This amendment is very straightforward. It would strike the entire statute that prohibits the freedom of employers and employees to engage in free commerce with one another to their mutual benefit. I move adoption, and I'd like a roll call vote.
Thank you, Senator. When we have a vote, it will be by roll as requested. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. This amendment would basically remove all of our existing statute related to this issue, and so I would urge my colleagues to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Will you remark further on the amendment? If not, Mr. Clerk, would you announce a roll call vote on the amendment?
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on the amendment 7396 for substitute for Senate Bill number 21, an act prohibiting employers from requiring an employment promissory note as a condition of employment. This is a vote on the amendment, LCO number 7396. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate. We're voting on the amendment, LCO number 7396. For the substitute for Senate Bill number 21, an act prohibiting employers from requiring an employment promissory note as a condition of employment. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate. LCO number 7396. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate.
Thank you. Have all the senators voted? The machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, would you kindly announce the tally?
LCO number 7396, Senate Bill 21. Total number voting 35. Total number voting yea 10. Total voting nay 25. Absent not voting
Thank you.
1.
And the amendment fails. Will you remark further on the bill? Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I do have an amendment I want to introduce. It's LCO number 7027. And this amendment, do I have to wait for you to say something?
I'm sorry, I've got someone in my ear here. Please start again if you would.
Thank you, Madam President. I do want to bring out an amendment. It's LCO number 7027.
Yes, indeed, and we will have the clerk call that amendment and put it on the board so that you can continue the discussion. Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 7027, Senate Amendment B.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. This is an amendment that would make this bill entirely, the new language entirely prospective. So in line 10, instead of October 1, 1985, it will be inserted July 1, 2023, and the same in line 17, changed from October 1st, 1985 to July 1, 2023. So the underlying bill would only be enforceable. The changes to the underlying bill and the changes to existing law would only be prospective. Thank you, Madam. And I believe we can have a voice vote on this.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that you have moved the amendment.
So moved.
Excellent. Okay, so we now have an amendment before the chamber. All in favor of the amendment? Oh, and I should ask, would anyone else like to remark on the amendment that is before the chamber? Will you remark on the amendment before the chamber? If not, we've been asked for a voice vote. Let me try your minds. All in favor of the amendment before the chamber, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Will you remark on the bill as amended? Will you remark on the bill as amended? Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you. And I rise with just a few questions for the proponent of the bill.
Media roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Substitute for Senate Bill number 21 as amended by Senate B. An act prohibiting employers from requiring an employment promissory note as a condition of employment. Media roll call vote in the Senate. We're voting on the bill as amended. Media roll call vote in the Senate. Substitute for Senate Bill number 21 as amended. An act prohibiting employers from requiring an employment promissory note as a condition of employment. Media roll call vote in the Senate. Substitute for Senate Bill number 21 as amended. We are voting on the bill. Media roll call vote in the Senate.